Hi, welcome to the I Heart Africa Project podcast. This is episode number 8. Now, in episode number 8, this is a continuation from our episode number 6, where I chatted with Ivan Carter. Hi, my name is Nikki. I run the I Heart Africa Project. I love Africa. It is a very special place to me. And so I'm putting together this project to showcase Africa in a very real capacity, providing insights into Africa from the perspectives of those who love it most. And on today's episode, I'm speaking to Ivan Carter. Ivan Carter was born and raised in Zimbabwe, and the importance of conservation and wildlife was instilled in him from a very young age as he was able to enjoy the wild places on his doorstep. The youngest person to ever receive his professional guiding license in Zimbabwe, Ivan has now been guiding safaris all over Africa for the past 30 years and was rated as one of Africa's top 10 guides by Conde Nast. He is a renowned wildlife expert, conservationist, TV show host, wildlife photographer, among many other hats he wears, founder of the Ivan Carter Wildlife Conservation Alliance, host of Carter's War, the untold story of Ivan's quest to save Africa, the world's most wild continent. Ivan is a hunter who is now a full-time conservationist, and he spends his time exploring new approaches and finding sustainable solutions to help bring about healthy and balanced ecosystems. Ivan once said, "Africa is not a place of darkness, and while the internet and news revel in tales of doom and despair, I see many rays of light and hope, and it is upon those that I am betting." It is an absolute honour to connect with Ivan today. He is truly a man of Africa, and is elbows deep, right in there, in the thick of it, doing the hard work in the field for conserving Africa's wild places and all those that live within it, the entire and vast array of ecosystems. And on that note...
Hey Nikki, how are you?
Oh, good morning, Ivan. How are you?
Really good.
Okay.
Good, thanks.
What is the essence of conservation?
You know, I think, Nikki, the essence of conservation is conserving an system. And I think that it's very important that in your conservation, in inverted commas, pursuit, that the result is an effort that leads to the conserving of an entire system. Because if you are species specific, that species may thrive, but an ecosystem has got very delicate balance, and so nothing can become overpopulated without degrading some other aspect of the ecosystem. And so biodiversity is key, and so the essence of conservation has to be preserving an entire biodiversity of a system.
Okay. So what does a balanced ecosystem look like?
So I think the essence of a balanced ecosystem is when you look at it, the soil, the water, the vegetation, and everything that lives in it that should be there is there. And very often the balance, just like a seesaw, goes up and down. So as one species goes a little bit higher, it leads to the decline of other species, and then it swings back. And so a balance is where that seesaw motion within an ecosystem continues. And so I think that what you very often find is if a conservation measure is too species specific, if we are just looking at elephants or just looking at rhinos or just looking at lions, we overlook the balance of the entire ecosystem. So you may end up with an ecosystem where you see thousands of animals, but a good ecologist will look at that and say this ecosystem is not in balance and runs the risk of literally falling over and everything dying, literally because you don't have the variety of organisms to keep each other healthy.
Yep. So do you think as a society we've become too sentimental with certain species to the point where only the species we care about are being conserved or saved, and others that aren't so prominent or in the limelight are being forgotten?
Yeah, I think absolutely that's a true statement, Nikki. We are drawn towards what I call a charismatic species, and so we want to see a lot of them. So we would rather go to a park and you say, we had a wonderful day today, we saw 700 elephants. Nobody says, well, what about the bushbuck? What about the other animals that have been displaced by the elephant? Because if you come back and you didn't see very many elephant, but you saw a lot of bushbuck and a lot of diversity a lot of butterflies, a lot of different birds. People say, well, it was a bit disappointing. We didn't see a lion and we didn't see very many elephants. And so I think that as humans, we are drawn towards these charismatic species. But what we need to understand as conservationists, it's quite fine for the general public to want to just see the charismatic stuff. But as conservationists, we need to make sure that the ecosystem is intact so it can support those charismatic species.
Yeah. And isn't that part of like evolution, that some species won't move forward and will become extinct? Do we have a duty to interfere with natural evolution to preserve these creatures, or should we allow natural evolution to take course? And obviously I'm not talking about the species of wildlife that have been forced into extinction through humans, but do we have the right to interfere with natural evolution, or should we allow it to take its natural course?
So here's a really shocking statistic. 96% of all mammals on Earth are humans and our livestock and pets.
Mm-hmm.
And so my question is, how do we know what is natural evolution and how do we know what is human impacted?
Yep.
So if a species of frog is going extinct in the rainforest because of acid rain, is that acid rain because of a volcanic eruption or because of human pollution into the air? And so I think it's very, very, very difficult to draw the line between natural evolution of a species, which takes thousands of years, and human-generated evolution, which is, we as humans, every single human on Earth, whether you're a vegetarian, whether you're a meat eater, it doesn't matter who you are, we have enormous impact, and we have enormous impact on our landscapes. And so if you're living in a high-rise building and you're a vegetarian, you forget that, around you and on the land that you're living, there is nothing natural. And so we have this amazing ability as humans to breed and proliferate and live in every single weather and ecosystem pattern and modify it to suit ourselves, to grow our food, to destroy the natural ecosystem, to put our houses on and plant our gardens and so on. And so I think that our impact is so huge that it's very hard to draw the line between what is human-generated evolution and what is natural evolution.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you think that in Africa, the human and animal conflict component has lessened over the years through education, or has it grown due to the growing number of humans and how we tend to spread out, or is enough being done in that component?
So I think that human-wildlife conflict is always a really big question. And I think one of the things we have to accept is there's more humans on the planet today than ever before. The growth in Africa of humans is projected of being bigger than anywhere else in the world. And so Africa, the human population is set to double every 25 years. And so that's more people requiring more land. And Africa's also home to the most prolific wildlife populations, many of which are dangerous to humans and to humans' livestock. So lions and leopards and things like that like to eat livestock. Livestock are the mainstay of the human diet in Africa. And so really when you look at it, you can't say that human-wildlife conflicts are going to get less. They're going to get more because the land set aside for wildlife is becoming less every single year, and the land set aside for humans is becoming more every year, and there's only so much land, so the conflict's going to increase.
Okay. Is there anything that we as humans can do to educate ourselves so that we individually are not creating more conflict?
I think that one of the most difficult things politically is in the third world, children and fertility is wealth, and there's a very deep tribal significance to it. And I think educating ourselves as human beings that smaller families, I mean, it's not uncommon for an African family to have 12 or 15 or 20 kids, and smaller families, which is less mouths to feed, and each of those kids are being brought up wanting to have their own huge families. And so I think that there's a huge amount that can be done, Nikki, and I think that it's a political minefield because Nobody wants to be the one that goes out and says, okay, well, everybody must have less children. So it's kind of an unaddressed deal. So every time that there's some kind of disease or famine or drought or whatever in the third world, the first world rushes to provide aid without ever addressing the core problem that led to that requirement of aid in the first place, which is overpopulation.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So if you keep getting something going on your skin, and all you do is put ointment on it without actually looking at your diet or what's going on in your body, you're going to carry on doing that forever, and that problem's just going to persist. And it's the same as what's going on in Africa. Nobody is addressing the human thing. We all, the medical aid organizations are coming in and making everybody healthier, so more children are surviving, so that eliminates the need for the big family. But no one is drawing the parallel and saying, okay, well, if we are going to help more of your kids survive, you ought to have less kids. Nobody's saying that.
Yeah. So on your website, you talk about wildlife conservation has to be based on 4 things. It has to be based on community engagement, sustainable resource use, wildlife protection, and solid science.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So very often the greatest threat to a wildlife population or a healthy ecosystem is the human element that's living around there. So they need to benefit directly and thoroughly from a healthy ecosystem. Because if they're not seeing a direct benefit, they are going to continue to try and rob that ecosystem of what they need to survive. And so appreciating the beauty of a wild animal is truly a concept that can only be understood by someone with a full stomach. And one thing you need to understand, Nikki, is that in most African cultures, the word for meat and the word for animal is the same word, which means that really, when you look at it, an animal is food first. It's not beauty first. To us who have never been hungry, you can look at it and say, wow, look at that beautiful animal. And so including the community is a very, very important component. The next and equally important component is basing every step you take for conservation, which generally your conservation efforts, if they're done well, are going to result in a change in the balance or an improvement in a particular population of a species. That needs to be founded on good science, good ecologists, good zoologists who understand balance, understand equilibrium, and understand that whatever you do is not going to imbalance or change the natural order of the landscape that you're in, which is very different to allowing it to naturally change. If you have a bad wet season and there's a drought and it's completely natural and a bunch of stuff dies, well, that's fine. That's no problem. But if you are seeing a poaching epidemic and you need to restock a certain species, or if you are seeing a chronic overpopulation of a particular species that is wiping out a particular plant or a particular aspect of the ecosystem, that needs to be managed. And so management with a strong foundation on science is absolutely key. The protection of the wildlife is key, because like anything, wildlife has got value. And in today's world, again, where there's so many people, every supermarket everywhere around the world has people steal things from it. And that is inside a building. So you can imagine an ecosystem with wildlife that is seen as food surrounded by hungry people. You have to have a protective element. That is absolutely a core component to that. And I think that, Nikki, the sustainable use model, I'd rather call it responsible resource use, because whether you are there as a photographic or a non-consumptive user, I don't like that word, because there is no such thing as a non-consumptive person. We consume things. And so if you're staying in a photographic lodge on the edge of a national park or in a national park, your lodge has got a footprint. You've got a carbon footprint. It's probably got a little bit of lawn there. It's millions of liters of water to the surface for people to shower in and flush the toilet. And it's probably got a water hole in the front of it that's probably man-made. So you've got water occurring in a part of an ecosystem that didn't have water before. And then you've got a road network for people to drive around in. burning fossil fuel to do so. And, 2 kilometers of road destroys an acre of land. So you've got a huge impact. And the same thing on a hunting side, you've got impact, but you've got a much smaller group of people. You've got one client at a time for several weeks a lot of the time. He's got a small staff, and absolutely, he will be harvesting or taking out of the ecosystem, a predetermined number of animals. However, his impact is measurable and it's sustainable. And so I think that making sure that your business model, whether it's hunting or photographic, can generate enough money to support the science and research, to support the protection, and to support the community around it, means that is what one must strive for. Because then you can get away from philanthropy, you can get away from anybody that's not an ecologist having a say, and you can carry on down the road with good, solid science, community engagement, and a well-rounded protective mechanism,
Yeah. So if someone from outside of Africa is sitting at home going, I want to help, they've seen the rhino, save the rhino, save the lion, but they're wanting to help with conservation based on a balanced ecosystem, where do you recommend they start? How do you recommend they help? What can they do?
So, Nikki, I think there's a lot of perceived help out there. I think one of the most important things is there's billions and billions of dollars from people's very well-meant donations that flow into places where they have no effect. And the one thing I can say is that if you want to help and you're ready to write a check, just do some research. And the 2 questions you need to ask is, whoever I write this check to, is my check going to directly result in more animals in a healthier ecosystem or not? And if you're not sure, write to them and ask them and say, hey, I want to know where my check's going to be used and how does that result in a healthier ecosystem? How is that going to result in more animals and more animals being healthy? And so, I think a lot of the time, at the other end of the phone, there'll be a deafening silence because people don't measure that stuff. They use the face of a charismatic species to raise a lot of money, and then they carry on down the road, and a lot of that money gets used to make the next fundraiser. And I'm not saying there aren't some fantastic organizations out there that have incredible impact. Nikki, I get emails almost every day from people wanting to come to Africa and volunteer their time. Now that's great, but remember, it's not labor that we need. It's skills, and we want to provide work for people, not give that work to volunteers. And so, at the end of the day, I hate to be as blunt as this, but the very best thing people can do in the first world is to come and visit and choose carefully where they visit, to educate themselves so that whether it's on social media or any other way, they've got an educated outlook and they're not just anti a particular thing because they heard that that's what's the fashionable thing to do. But then I think thirdly, Nikki, is if they are going to write checks to organizations that they know are resulting in more wildlife and healthier ecosystems,
Yeah. I guess when you give money and it goes into the hands of the right people and provides jobs into the local communities and those that are unemployed in Africa, people in Africa, when they have a job and they're earning money, they're less likely to go hungry, which means the wildlife then is more likely to be conserved by that individual. Would you say that's right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that, Nikki, there's a whole move now across Africa for what we call voluntourism, where people want to come and volunteer to have this amazing experience where they bottle feed orphaned rhinos or they live and work in a chimpanzee sanctuary or whatever it might be. They want to come and volunteer and this stuff. But what they forget is that they are going to come, they're going to need to be taught how to have to have liability insurance the moment they set foot in they're unskilled labor that needs to be taught. And as they get good and useful, their 3 months is up, or their 2 months is up, or their 2 weeks is up, and they leave, and you got to start the process again. And so it's it's not an ideal scenario, and I think it needs to be said how it is, which is, it is serving the volunteer. It is not necessarily serving the project at all.
No,
and
that's...
so the voluntourism
Yep.
is what it does is it there's a very common model these days where people will charge a significant amount of money for people to come and participate and in inverted commas volunteer, and it's actually that's how the business model works.
Yeah.
So it's tourism, but it's more like hands-on tourism.
Yep.
It's not necessarily any cheaper than going on a trip, but a lot of people say, look, I don't have money, but I've got time. Can I come and help you? And that sounds great on the face of it, but the reality is no, not really, because I don't want to have to manage you, and it's not help. And there's a great quote, Nikki, that says, help that is not helpful is not help at all. And so, the very best way that, if you want to go and do one of those voluntourism deals, that's fantastic. Go and do it. But choose one that the organization is doing something good, and that it's going to be one that you have to pay to go to. And like I say, there's whole agencies and there's a whole business model around people volunteering at these various places in Africa. Now, there are some of them where it really is helpful, and there's what we call citizen science, where people are using the general public to help them with observing or looking at photos or whatever it might be, and that can work very well, but nobody does it because it doesn't include a trip to Africa. And the reality is, what they want is an adventure to Africa. They're not necessarily, they're passionate about rhinos or lions or baby something or chimpanzees or whatever. Of course they're passionate about that. They're not looking to help that from sitting at home. They're looking to help that from having an adventure in Africa,
Yep.
You very often will get these people who every couple of years they volunteer at a different place, and the reality is, I'm not sure how much their impact is, Nikki, which is very sad. A lot of the time they're good people, but they're not having the impact that they think they are. They may go and endure a bit of hardship somewhere and cut some fruit up for chimpanzees for a few weeks, but the person who they are replacing, they're not usually replacing anybody, because they've got to have someone to teach them, they've got to have someone to watch over them, and it actually costs the company money. So they've got to have somewhere to stay, and it, like I say, it's just a misconception of the world that volunteers are really helpful. Now, I'm not talking about the kind of volunteers that are rushing in after a hurricane and helping rebuild and truly are helping. I'm talking about volunteers to wildlife sanctuaries and things.
Yeah, that would make a really fascinating study for anyone out there that wants to examine the impact that actual volunteers are having on wildlife conservation. That would be a wonderful study. It'd be interesting.
Well, there's lots and lots of it, even in orphanages, Nikki. So you can imagine these orphans that are suffering huge abandonment issues. Some young girl arrives from, whether it's India or America or Australia or New Zealand or Germany, it doesn't matter where in the world they arrive from. They're there for 3 months, they truly connect with these kids, and then they're gone.
Yeah.
Does that help that kid with its abandonment issues?
Just as an example, I know the Sheldrake Elephant Sanctuary, is it? They do not allow their volunteers to become the mums. Like, how there's all those men in the green suits, the 24-hour carers for the elephants. They do not allow the volunteers to come in and be those 24-hour carers. They can help, but they don't get to do that bonding. And I think that's really something quite special there, because it gives the local communities, the people from the local communities, value by being, in jobs, and they get the connections and they get the meaningful, I don't know what the word is, with the wildlife, and so then the elephants aren't double suffering.
I think that the Daphne Sheldrake model, and again, make no mistake, you're going to pay a fair amount of money to go and volunteer there, and it's a business model. You're not helping with your time, you're helping with the dollars you bring. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, Ivan, this has been absolutely fascinating. I have got a couple of really quick questions for you, and then we'll wrap it up. So, my first quick question for you is, why do you love Africa, and what does it mean to you?
I think what it is, Nikki, is it's something about the freedom of these large open spaces with a huge diversity of wildlife and organisms living in it. That's absolutely the draw for me. It's something where when you are in a balanced ecosystem, people will say that, when you go to Africa, you really want to come back. And many people wonder about what that is and try and put their finger on what it is that's so attractive. And I think that's what it is these amazingly diverse ecosystems with, big animals in them that are always fascinating to us as humans. And I think that one of the reasons I put so much effort into Africa is I can't imagine a world where my children or their children don't have the opportunity of going and seeing a wild elephant or a wild giraffe or a wild lion, or an area with 1,000 butterflies flying around their heads, or a nesting colony of thousands of birds, or a cave full of bats, or all of these things that are becoming more and more difficult to find and see. I can't imagine a world without those, Nikki, and I just don't think that there's enough people practically engaging in conservation without, people are lured into the business of conservation as opposed to just literally getting out there and trying to solve these problems,
The true wildlife heroes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, so tell us, what is your favourite place in Africa and why?
I don't know if I've got a favourite place, Nikki. I really don't. I love different parts of East Africa are absolutely spectacular. The Okavango Delta is amazing. There's places like the Zambezi Delta where the Zambezi River goes into the ocean in Mozambique. The Kruger National Park's amazing. But then there's also a lot of little ecosystems that aren't necessarily part of a big majestic national park, but just are really cool little ecosystems. And so I think that anytime you're in a wild place that's away from humans and that's somewhat in balance, I love those places. And I think I'm gonna spend the rest of my life looking at those places and seeing what we need to do to protect them,
Yeah, cool. Yeah. So what's next for you? What are you up to?
So I just got back from Uganda where we worked with Giraffe Conservation Foundation to translocate a bunch of giraffes into an ecosystem that hasn't had giraffes since the 80s.
Yep.
And then, I'm about to go across to America where at this time of the year it's their capture season, and I engage with a few of the capture teams there and see what science and stuff they're doing on different American species. But also that's our fundraising time where with a good fundraising season, it amplifies our efforts that what we can put onto the front line next year. So busy couple of months ahead, but that's kind of how I roll. There's never a time when my calendar's empty for too long,
That sounds fantastic. I just want to say a big thank you. Without amazing people like yourself, this project could never have come about, and my love and passion for Africa could not be shared with the world on such a grand scale. Just before we conclude, do you have any final comments?
Yeah, I think that, Nikki, let's get back to what we started on, and that is a balanced ecosystem. So no matter where we are in the world, whether you're in Asia and Europe and Australia, the Australasian islands, the South America, wherever you are, humans have impact. We need to accept that, and our impact results in an imbalance. So even if it is something as simple as a wheat farmer where there's a certain species of bird perhaps that lives on the wheat that completely explodes to the detriment of something else, whether we place in northeastern South Africa where we're starting to see Indian miners, which are birds that were brought to kind of probably about 500 miles here. They came from India and they're slowly colonizing Africa. That's a human impact. It's creating an imbalance. A lot of the natural birds are getting pushed out of the way by this very prolific species. And I think that really coming back to one thing, the comment I'd like to make is that our conservation efforts need to lead to balanced ecosystems, because if we are too species specific and if we just focus on elephants and lions and rhinos, maybe one day we're going to look up and that's all we're going to have, because nobody's been focusing on the entire ecosystem. And it disappears, those bigger animals are going to disappear anyway, because they require the balance of the rest to provide them with an ecosystem to live in.
Very well said. I couldn't agree more. Hey, Ivan, you're such a fascinating man, and it has been my absolute pleasure talking to you today. I can't wait to talk to you again and see what you've been up to. So I will talk to you again soon.
Fantastic, Nikki. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity, and look forward to our next chat.
Awesome. So I just wanted to say one more time a massive thank you to Ivan Carter. Without people like yourself, this project could never have come about, and my love and passion for Africa could not be shared with the world on such a grand scale. For those of you who want to find out more about what Ivan is up to, of course you can follow him on social media. All the links are in the post below, comments below. Otherwise you can go to ivancarter.com or ivancarterwca.org, and on Facebook he is Ivan Carter's Africa, and on Instagram he's ivan.carter, but all the links to social media are below. Thank you for taking the time to listen today, and I hope you learnt something, enjoyed something. Ivan Carter is an amazing, amazing person who we can all take a lesson from and take a page from his book. Have a good day.